In this video, I'll be going over how you can set up a one-time password authentication with AWS Amplify, which uses Amazon Cognito, at least at the time of this recording. In short, what your users will be able to do is when they sign up, they do not need to provide a password that they have to remember every single time. They will sign up, provide an email address, get a verification code sent to that email address, and then once their account or the user is verified, any subsequent logins will now require a password. However, a one-time code will be generated and sent to that user's email address for authentication. So there's no need to memorize any passwords. So as far as prerequisites, aka what I will not be going over in depth in this video, you should have Node.js installed and configured on your local machine, as well as npm. You should also have an active AWS account. The free tier should work just fine. The resources that we set up here should not incur any charges. However, you can always just delete them once you've kind of tested it out. And the last thing is also to have the Amplify CLI configured on your local machine. If you are not familiar with how to set up the Amplify CLI, I have another video that kind of goes over how to do so, and I will also provide a link to the Amplify docs that show you how you can quickly set up your Amplify CLI. The Amplify CLI is important for this project because it'll make configuring and deploying the resources needed much easier than having to do it all manually. So as far as what this video will entail, the different sections, aka like a breakdown of it, there are going to be four main steps that I'll cover. First, we'll make sure that Amazon SES, Simple Email Service, which we will use to send the one-time password to the user, we'll make sure that that's enabled and set up correctly. We will then use a React project for this. I'll be using Vite or Vite, depending on how you pronounce it, to scaffold our React project. And then once we have the React project scaffold, we'll then go ahead and initialize Amplify within the React project and set it up and connect it to our AWS account, in short. And then the main bulk of this, or the major part of this, is to then configure three Lambda functions that will be used for the custom authentication. These are the same Lambda functions you would use if you were setting up Cognito directly and not going through Amplify. However, doing it with Amplify does make the setup a bit easier and just allows you to worry about the development part of things and not worry about having to go to the console and click on things. So without much else, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to go ahead and do is set up the email service with Amazon SES. This is the email service that we're going to use via the AWS SDK to be able to send a one-time password to the user when they try to log in. So we'll go ahead and navigate to the console, the SES console. So just come up here and type in SES. It should be the first option. And then what we'll go ahead and do is we need to create an identity. You can click this button here, but you can also come to the navigation here and look at verified identities. As you can see, I don't have any verified identities. The reason why this is needed is this is the identity or email address that will be used as the from address whenever the OTP is sent. But in this case, just for demo purposes, I'm just going to use my Gmail address. So I'll go ahead and I'll type that in here. And then I will go ahead and just create identity. So once that is done, I'll need to go ahead and get it verified. So what it basically did was send an email to my account that I'll need to go ahead and verify. Alright, so I've gone ahead and received that verification email. It's a link that comes in your email. I'm going to go ahead and click it in a different window here. And then once you do that, you should get a verify success page that looks something like this. Once we come back here, if we refresh this page, we'll see that the verification status or the identity status is set to verified. Now we are able to send emails with this specific email address that we have set up here. Another thing to note is by default, your Amazon SES account is set up in sandbox mode. And so what this means is there's going to be some limits that you're going to face in Sandbox. Like for example, you are not able to send to any email address. You can only send to verified email address. So for example, I can only send from and to this email address. If I wanted to send an email to any other email address, I'd have to go ahead and create the identity and get it verified. However, you are able to request to get out of sandbox mode into production. And here's some information about that. I'll also include this link in the description. As you can see, in sandbox mode, you're only able to send to verified email address or domains. You can only send a maximum of 200 messages in 24 hours, and you cannot send more than one message per second. So keep this in mind once you're ready to go into production and you want to, use this to send emails to unverified addresses, random people out there. You do need to go ahead and make sure that you are no longer in sandbox mode. And now that we have our verified identities set, I'll go ahead and set up and scaffold the React app. Next thing we're going to go ahead and do is we will scaffold our React app. As I mentioned, I'm going to be using Vite for this. You can use, create React app if you'd like, or you can just, do it from scratch, which is not really recommended. Um, so let me go ahead and start that process. So I'm going to open up my terminal. Let's make that a little bit small, and then I will just do npm create Vite at latest in the current working directory. So we hit yes, and I'm gonna do React, JavaScript, and now as you can see, it's set up our React project. A couple of things to note is we will need to go ahead and make some configuration changes. I'll do some now. The first thing is we will need to define a global object since Amplify does need that. So in the vite.config.js file, in the define config export, just go ahead and add a new attribute here, and we'll just call it define. And then it will be an object, and then we'll say global empty object. And this is needed to be able to run AWS Amplify within our project. Now that we have our React app set up here, we are now ready to initialize Amplify. Again, as mentioned, you should already have the Amplify CLI set up and configured, and as well as a profile that will be used to authenticate against the AWS cloud. If you haven't done this yet, I do have a video on my channel that does go over how to configure the AWS CLI, and it'll make this process easier for you. So let's go ahead and first make sure that we do have Amplify installed. So I'll do Amplify version, and I should have the latest version, which is 10.2.3, and we're good to go. So now we can go ahead and run Amplify init, and this will go ahead and initialize the project in the cloud, as well as set up Amplify locally on the machine by creating an Amplify directory on an Amplify folder on our root project directory. Here you can pass in your own name, but I'll keep it the same as my project name. So I'll hit enter. Here's some project configuration that will be used by default. You are able to modify this as needed. So I'll hit enter. And then, as I mentioned, I already have my AWS profile configured on my machine, which is again essentially just a user that has access credentials to my AWS account. So I'll hit profile, and my named profile is Amplify CLI tutorial. So I'll go ahead and I'll choose that, and that should go ahead and authenticate and begin the initial deployment to the cloud to set up my project. All right, so our deployment is complete, and if we run Amplify status, we should see that we have the project in the cloud. but there are no categories added. We have the name of our environment, so we are good to go. With our backend initialized in the cloud, let's go ahead and configure the authentication. It's pretty straightforward. We just run amplify, add, and then the category that you want, in this case, auth. Once we do that, we will do manual configuration. So go ahead and select that option. So for the first option, we want to have sign up, sign in with IAM controls. So let's go ahead and set that up. And then just want to give it a whatever name you want to give it. I'll keep it as a default and hit enter. It will also create an identity pool automatically. So if you want to give it a specific name for it, you can. However, I just keep it the same. Do we want unauthenticated logins? For this scenario, I'm going to go ahead and say no. I'm also not using any third-party authentication providers. I'm going to go ahead and the user pool name, keep it default. For here, I'm going to choose email. That way the OTP can be sent to an email. I do not need any groups. I am not using the admin queries API, and I am not using MFA. This will keep it as enabled. Verification code, keep that as default. Keep that as default as well. I do not want to override that. I want to require an email address attribute. Keep that as default. Keep that, just say no to that. And then here is a big important step. So here we want to go ahead and configure custom auth challenge flow. So go ahead and go to that option. This will generate three Lambda functions, one called define auth, a define auth challenge, a second one called create auth challenge, and a third one called verify. And the names basically mean what they do. I do not want an OAuth flow. And I'm going to go ahead and say yes here. Those are the Lambda triggers that we enabled on 2 steps before for the custom auth challenge. You just want to make sure that they are selected. So we hit yes. And then as you can see here, there's a create auth challenge trigger. There's a define auth challenge trigger and a verify auth challenge response trigger. So we go ahead and as long as those 3 are selected, we'll hit enter. And we'll keep it for the first one, for the create auth challenge, we'll keep that a custom auth challenge scaffolding. Same thing for the second and the third function. So right now, you do have an option to just say yes to be able to edit that boilerplate function at this time, but I'm going to go ahead and just say no for all 3, 2, and 3. And we'll take a look at that here in a bit. Right, so now that we have added our Amplify category, there's a couple of changes we want to make before we push it to the cloud. So in our Amplify directory that we created when we did Amplify add or Amplify init, we'll come in here and we will find the backend subdirectory, and then we'll take a look at function since that's what we created. Again, not auth, but the function for the 3 functions that were created. And you'll notice that there are 3 functions here. There's the create auth challenge, there's the define auth challenge, and then there's the verify challenge response. I'll quickly go through all these and keep in mind that the order of invocation for these functions is first it goes to the define auth challenge, which will basically define what type of challenge you want to send to the user, and then based on that it'll come in to create the auth challenge, and once that is created it'll send a response back to the client of your app or the user, and then the user will respond to that challenge, whether it's an OTP code in this case or something else. And then once they respond, it'll come back and invoke the verify auth challenge, and this will basically just verify whether they answered it correctly or not, and either allow access or deny based on that. So I'll quickly go through all 3, but we're mainly going to be looking at the create auth challenge since that's where we want to create our challenge. So let me start with the first one, the define auth challenge. It'll create this basically Node.js based function for you, a Lambda function for you. And then we want to look at the boilerplate define challenge file. However, note that you can fully customize this logic however you want. If you have a complex challenge flow or complex function flow, you can in- invoke this, but by default it will start at the index.js file, and you do need this is where the exports handler lives, where it's handled by the Lambda AWS Lambda service. For this case, it has been uh, basically removed and put in a different file to make it easy to edit. So in this case here, we do have a how it defines a challenge. It has this different if-else statements. You can learn more about this in the Cognito documentation, but in short, there three different kind of authentication methods. There's the SRP, there's the password verifier, and the custom challenge. So in this case, it's going to look through this define challenge Lambda function until it comes and meets this criteria for custom challenge, and that will go ahead and invoke our create auth challenge flow. As far as the create auth challenge flow, we do see same kind of format with a boilerplate file. But again, keep in mind that the index file is what is going to be invoked first, since that's what's going to be set as the handler. Um, and then here we have our create challenge flow. In short, the default one, all it does is it will invoke this and it manually sets that to true. It doesn't do much logic, and then the response that is sent to the verify uh, Lambda function here is gonna pull whatever value that you set in the environment variable. So for example, if it's always the same code, or maybe if you have a way to programmatically update the process environment variable, this is one way to do it. But however, this is just for demonstration. We will be modifying this Lambda function here in order to meet our needs of having the OTP password. And then finally, we will quickly take a look at that verify Lambda function. Again, it's pretty straightforward. All it does is it just takes the private challenge parameters, the answer, and then whatever the challenge answer was. So basically, the OTP, or in this, as we saw in the create the default create auth challenge Lambda function, whatever value is in the environment variable, it'll compare to what the user submits, and if they're the same, if they equal the same, just return true, and this will grant access. But if they're different, return false. So again, we're not gonna make any changes to this. However, keep in mind for all three of these Lambda functions, you have a unique use case that you want to add some functionality, some extra checks, then you are able to modify them. But for this particular exercise, we'll keep it pretty simple, and we'll only look at the create auth challenge Lambda function code. So with that being said, let me go ahead and begin. So first things first, we'll go ahead and we will create a function that will send the OTP. So I'm going to use an arrow function here. We will want it to be an async function, and then we want two parameters that this function takes: email and the code. And then here what we do is we're gonna set up the message template that we're gonna send to the user. So I'm gonna go ahead and define that really quickly. Um, and this is all based on SES, what SES expects as a parameter in order to send emails. There's documentation on that. I'm gonna link that in the description as well. So subject, and then our subject we'll have a data field, and we're just going to say here is your OTP. And then next to the subject, we want to include the body of the message, the actual body that will have the OTP code. And then we're going to do text, and the data will be your, stringify that, your login code is, and then the code that we pass in the function parameter here. Next, once we have our message defined there, we're going to go ahead and initialize some parameters that we use to send with the SES. So we're going to go ahead and say, going to call this params. Destination, this is basically where we want our email to go to. And so we're going to say to address, and this needs to be an array, but since we're only just sending one email, this is the email that the function will take in as an argument. And then the next thing we need is the actual message, and this is the message template that we just defined above. And then the source, this is the actual verified email address source that we're going to be using, that SES that we defined in the SES console earlier, that is used to actually send the email. This will show up as the from email address. So I'll go ahead and input that. I'm going to hard code it for demo purposes anyway. So now that we have that set up, we need to go ahead and install the AWS SDK for this Lambda function. So we're gonna open up a new terminal window here, and we need to go ahead and cd into the Lambda function source folder. Right now, as you can see, we're at the root, so we're gonna go cd amplify slash backend slash function. And so far we see we're in the list of 3 functions, so we're gonna do cd, and I'm just gonna copy this to make it easier to type in that whole thing. Cd into that, and then now we're in this function, we need to cd one more time into the source folder. So cd source, and here we see that we have our package JSON, so this is an npm project. So now we can go ahead and do npm install aws-sdk. And for this, I am using the V2 version of the AWS SDK. As of the time of this recording, there is a newer V3 version. However, for this purpose, I'll just be using the V2 version. So we'll go ahead and install that within this create auth challenge function. We'll let that run, and then we can verify that we did install it correctly. Come to the create auth challenge lambda folder source, check out package JSON, and we do see that AWS SDK is part of our dependencies. So we're doing great so far. So now that we have that, let's go ahead and initialize that AWS. So we're going to say const AWS require, AWS SDK. And then we need to go ahead and also define that SES. So I'm just going to use a var for this. SES new AWS SES, just like that. So great, we're doing pretty good so far. So now in our send OTP function that we wrote, at the end here, we want to go ahead and return SES dot. The method that we need is send email, and then the send email will take in our params that we configured there. And I want this to return a promise, so I can be able to do async await. And that's the minimum of what we have to set up. Keep in mind that, if you want to have some more complex error checking and things like that, you can modify this as needed. However, for this demonstration, I'm just going to keep it as simple as possible. So now that we have that, we're going to call this send OTP method within our handler here. So let's go ahead and make some changes here. The first thing I want to do is I want to generate my secret code. So I'll just use the current date and then slice that to 6 characters. So I'm going to say secret OTP. I'm going to use the date method now, and then convert that to string. And then we're gonna slice to 6 characters. So that now every time this lambda function runs, it will take the current date and then just turn that to a string and slice that to the last 6 digits. That way it's it's gonna be as random as possible just based on the time frame. However, if you want to make this more complex, you can definitely use other different methods for this. However, for this example, this is just for this tutorial, this is just an example of how to generate an OTP, a one-time passcode. The next thing we need to do is now also grab the email that we need to that the user is using to log in. And to do that, let's define an email variable constant here. And then from the event object, we're going to go to the request attribute. And then we can get the user attributes. And these are the user attributes that come from Cognito. And then here you should have an email field. So now that we have that, we can leave this if else check the same since we are using the custom challenge flow. And then so we want to keep the public challenge parameters trigger set to true. And so now after this, before the response is set, the event response is set, this is where we want to add the send OTP method. So I'm going to go ahead and since I did define this as an async function, I'm going to go ahead and await it. That way it completes this with before it tries the lambda function tries to complete processing. And then the two parameters that we need, which is the email, I'll go ahead and grab that email from here. And then the generated code is that secret OTP. So now that we have that, when this lambda function runs, it's going to come in, initialize the AWS, the SES service, and then it'll randomly generate the OTP based on the current date, current time. We'd also get the email address from the event object. As part of the request, it does include the user attributes for the Cognito user. And then once it'll check for the session length as well as the challenge name of that request. As long as they both fit this, it'll set the response to true. And then before we do anything else here, we will go ahead and send that email with the OTP here, which will come in and just format it into this message and then invoke SES send email method. And that those parameters include this as the source, and then the to address is the email that we get from the user here. One last thing we do need to add here is we need to modify this, the actual private challenge parameter. So this is the parameter that will be used by the verify auth function to make sure that the user did enter the correct challenge or the correct code. So we're going to just set that as well to secret OTP. If you leave this as process env, then whatever challenge answer is set in your environment variable for this lambda function is what will be used and forwarded to the verify function. However, since we're generating our own here, we also want to make sure that we pass it as part of the response and the private challenge parameters answer. So now that we've done this, we can hit save. And for the most part, we are almost done with setting up our backend. The next thing that we need to do is, since we are using the SES service, we do need to give this lambda function permission to invoke it. So the way to do that in Amplify is you come to the function itself, and then there's a custom policies file here that we need to edit. And in this custom policies, what we need to do is allow the action that we need to allow is for SES to be able to send email. And then the resource is, for now, we're just gonna use a wildcard, which basically means any resource. However, you may want to kind of lock this down a little bit more. But for this demonstration purposes, we just need to allow this SES action for send email on any resource that this lambda can be able to run. So now that we have done that, there's nothing really else left to do here other than configure the front end. However, before I do that, let me go ahead and push these changes. So I'm going to run amplify status first, which will kind of show me the current status of my project compared to locally in the cloud. So as you can see here, and let me just close that out. As you can see here, we have 4 different resources that are going to get created. So let's go ahead and run amplify push, and then you'll see that the same status will show up before the push happens. It's just telling you that, hey, in this dev environment, this is what I'm about to do. And if you're okay with it, you can just say yes to confirm, and we'll let that run. All right, so now since we've gone ahead and deployed our backend, we run amplify push. It set up all our resources, our user pool, our Lambda functions, and everything else that's needed. We can now go ahead and work on setting up our front end. And since we're using React with Vite, the first thing I need to do is install those dependencies, because I don't believe I did install them before. So let's do npm install or let me just do the whole command. And so what this will do, it'll just install these basic dependencies and our dev dependencies to our project. And as you can see, it did create a node modules, which I don't believe was there before. So now if we do npm run dev, this should open up in port 5174. Oh, what? Oh, I hit options instead. So if we go ahead and open this up in a new window, okay, I'm gonna redo this. Okay, so I'm gonna go back to when I said the node modules. Okay, don't forget to delete that part. Okay, go. All right, now so we can go ahead and run our app locally. npm run dev, and that should open this up on port 5174. It's probably because I have another app running on 5173. I believe that's the default. So let's go ahead and open it up anyway, so we can see that the default React Vite app is running. We don't have any errors here, so everything is good. Now we can go ahead and continue setting up Amplify for our front end. So I'll go ahead and install our AWS Amplify library. Okay, so that went ahead and installed AWS Amplify, so we're good to go. As you can see, it has been added to our dependencies section. We now need to go ahead and actually configure Amplify. So we need to go to the source directory, and then here I'm gonna go ahead and just disable strict mode, because I don't want that. I don't want it running on strict mode and rendering everything twice. I'll go ahead and import Amplify from AWS Amplify, and then I'll import my config file from AWS config. Actually, let me AWS exports. That's my mistake. And then we'll just call amplify configure, and then pass in our configuration. And that is it. We've now configured our application to use Amplify based on the Amplify AWS exports file here, and this was auto-generated by the CLI whenever we ran Amplify init, and then it gets auto-updated anytime you do you add some kind of category or delete something or make some configuration changes. However, keep in mind that you are also able to set up Amplify without having to use a CLI. You just have to pass in your own custom config information here based on your existing resources. For example, Cognito, or S3 for storage, or AppSync for your GraphQL. So now that we have that done, let's go ahead and start setting this up. So again, as we can refresh here, we don't see any errors. And just to kind of show you the reason why we added global here, if we comment that out, we'll get an error here that basically says there's no reference to global as it's not defined. So that's why we did need to include that there. So now that we have everything working, let's go ahead and make some changes here to our front end. So I will first go into the app.jsx, and then I'll go ahead and just basically just delete everything out of here. Well, let me leave some. I'll delete that, and then I'll just change that to Amplify with OTP. And then we'll leave this button method here, and then we'll just say sign up. In short, I'm just going to add some buttons here. I'll delete that, and then I'll add another button here, and then we'll just say verify sign up. And then I'll also replace this with another div of class name card. And then I'll also add some additional buttons here. Button on, let me not set that up yet, and I'll just do sign in. And then I'll add another button here of verify sign in. Let me just say OTP. And then just for fun, I'll also include a sign out button here. And those at the minimum are the 5 buttons that we're going to use or need for this project. So we have our sign up, verify sign up, sign in, and then the verify sign in button, and then sign out. As we can, when we open this up, we'll see the 3 different sections here. We have the sign up, sign in, sign out. The next thing we need to do is, I'll clean this up just a little bit, and I'll go ahead and import our auth from AWS Amplify. And then I also need to do some configuration here in order to use the custom authentication. I believe it should just be auth configure and then authentication flow type, I believe. And then this should just be custom auth. And this does need to be in an object. So let's wrap that. So this is important to have because this is what tells Amplify on that this particular project will use a custom authentication flow type. Otherwise, it will always expect you it will just log you in with a username and a password and not go through the custom authentication process of triggering those Lambda functions, which will defeat the purpose and anybody can just log in. All right, so there are a couple of more things we need to go ahead and add. Again, you might have a different way of setting up these variables, but for now I'm just going to use the state. So first we'll need the user name, and then we'll set username, use state, and for now I'll just keep it as an empty string. Um, and then we also need the confirmation code for sign up. Use state, another empty string. And then we'll also need the cognito user. And this is going to be an object, so I'm just going to initialize it with an empty object. And then I'll go ahead and also set our OTP, set OTP. And this will be our this will be just an empty string. This is the OTP that will be emailed to us that we'll set in. And then one additional thing, I'll go ahead and also set up the user state. And that might be a little confusing, but the reason we're setting this up, this will basically tell us which form to show based on the process that we're going through. So for example, um, when we first sign in or when we first visit the page, for example, you might want it to be, for example, login state. You might want it to be sign up, and then based on that, we'll show a specific uh, form slash buttons here. So let's go ahead and now we'll set up our methods. So we have a new user method here. This is going to be an async function. Takes no parameters. And then we're going to wrap it in a try catch block. Gonna get our response from auth sign up, and then the user name. And then since the auth sign up method does require a password to be used, we're gonna also use the username for the password as well. This is a key point for this workflow. This is how we're able to set up a OTP. In short, instead of providing a password field, you just provide a username field on your form, and then that username is used as the username and the password. However, you're not able to completely sign in until you correctly respond to the OTP that's generated. For now, we're gonna go ahead and let's just console log that response so you have an idea of how that looks like, and then let's catch any errors that show up here. Awesome. So next thing we do is confirm the new user. Again, this is also an async function. Wrap it in a try catch block. And then the method that we're going to use here is going to be confirm sign up. And then this will take the username as well as the confirm code that we set with our form. Let's go ahead and console log that response as well, and then catch any errors that may occur. All right, now we need the third method here, which is the actual login method. Another async function. Try catch. As you can see, it's pretty standard. It's going to be sign in, and then we're going to use the username. Again, the username twice because that's what we set as the password. and then console log the response, and then catch any errors that we see. And then finally, last but not least, this is the OTP login. This is where we enter that OTP code that we're sent to our email. So this is also going to be an async function. And then try catch block const. Grab that response, await, auth, send custom challenge answer. And this takes in the Cognito user. And this user is returned by the login method here. So when we log in, since we have custom the authentication flow as set to custom auth, this login method, as long as it's successful, it'll return a Cognito user object. And this Cognito user object is what we need to provide to the send custom challenge answer method alongside our OTP. So I'll go ahead and also console log this. And again, we're going to catch any errors that are returned to us. All right, so then once we have that set up, again, we see that I misspelled that there. Let me fix that. So we see that so far we've done a couple things. We've set up our auth. We've configured authentication flow type to be custom auth. We've defined a couple of states, variables, whatever, use as username, our confirmation code that's used for signing up, and then the Cognito user that we need to provide to the send custom challenge answer, and then our OTP that we enter. We also have this use state that we're going to use to display the different forms. Right now, if you look at our project, we're showing everything on one screen, but that use state, we're basically going to use it to show the different fields based on the step that we're in. So for example, when we're signing up, it should just show like the sign up field with the username that we're going to sign up with. And then whenever we need to verify, it should just show the verify sign up form by including the username and the code that we need to enter. And then for signing in, same thing. And then for verifying sign in, same thing. So let's go ahead and now modify this front end a little bit more. So the first thing we want to do is we are going to check our user state and see if it equals to sign up. And if so, we want to display our sign up form. So we can go ahead and remove this button here. So we have just a simple form that has sign up and then an input field that takes in our username, and then anytime the username is changed, it sets the username we have up here to whatever the value of that field is. And then once we're ready to sign up, we will click the sign up button here, and that will invoke the new user method here. We've also added a little link here that basically says if you'd rather just sign in instead, since you've already signed up, then it will just change our state to sign in. Then the next thing we need to set up here is our confirm signups. So we check user state and see if it equals to confirm sign in. And if it does, we want to go ahead and display a form that will take in our verification code that was sent to us on sign up. And again, keep in mind this is a different code than what is sent to you by the custom challenge. This is one that Cognito handles for you in the backend. However, there are some additional triggers such as pre-sign up trigger, post-sign up trigger, and pre-sign in trigger that you can also modify if you want to add some custom functionality for this. However, this video is not focusing on that. So since we do have that confirm sign up screen here, again, it's pretty similar to the sign up. We have an input field that takes in the confirmation code, and then a button that when clicked invokes this confirm new user. So that's going to take in the username, and we're assuming that we are not leaving this session or refreshing the session. So the username will still be set by this here. However, you can also include, and let me just go ahead and do that actually. Go ahead and include that there. That way this can work if you do leave the screen. So we can go ahead and remove the verify sign up here. And actually, let me also move this there. All right, so the next thing we need to do is check for when the user state is equal to sign in. And actually, I forgot to include this operator here. And if it is equal to sign in, then we want to show the sign in form. So this sign in form again will set the username to that, and then the onClick should invoke this login method, which I'm not sure why it's. Is it because I think it's, yep, that's the problem. So this should invoke the sign in method. So we have a couple more screens to go through. The next one is the OTP screen. So whenever the user is sent the one-time password to sign in, same idea. Set the user state. If it's equal to OTP, then we want to display the one-time password with nothing else here, since we're already going to get the username. We're assuming they're doing this in the same window, same browser. If they navigate, then they have to enter the username one more time. So let's go ahead and save that. And one other thing that we want to include is when they are signed in. Let's change this to signed in. So far we're looking good. Go ahead and remove these. We no longer need those. And then let me save that. So as you can see here, our state is not defined yet because this needs to be an uppercase, sign up. So let's save that. And now we have our sign up form here. I'm getting a couple errors. Confirm sign in is not a function. So let's take a look at, it's probably just the name. Confirm sign in is not a function. Confirm sign in. Let me search because I'm not seeing it. Confirm sign in. Huh, where is that coming from? Interesting. Let me refresh this. Okay, not sure why that error was coming up, but it's gone now. So as you can see here, when we first load the app, the user state is automatically set to sign up. And so based on our logic here, we're going to show this form. I did include this link here that basically changes, uh, actually looking at the wrong one. This link here that basically changes the user state to sign in, which if you already signed up and we have an account, we would just want to sign in directly. Then we would click on sign in instead, and that changes us to a sign in. So let's go ahead and start the process of signing up. This will go ahead. Actually, there's a few more things for us to do here before we get ahead of ourselves. We do need to modify these functions here. So for the new user function, I'm going to go ahead and once we console log that, let's go ahead and change the user state, set user state to confirm. What was it? Confirm. Let me change that to confirm sign up. Yep. So we're gonna set that to confirm sign up. And let me just comment this out really quickly just so we can make sure that that shows as expected. And then when we send in our confirmation code, as long as that's successful, we want to set the user state to, was it sign in or login? Sign in, perfect. So let's say sign in. And then once we've logged in, let's go ahead and say set user state to OTP. That way we can see the screen. Comment that out as well, it's just for testing purposes. And then once we have the correct OTP submitted with no errors, then we want to go ahead and set that to signed in. Awesome. Signed in. So let's quickly just test out these methods, make sure that everything works as expected. So let's say you sign up. Let's say foo@bar.com, sign up. Oh, because I'm trying to console log this response. So let me comment all these out for now. Then we can save that and let's try again. Sign up. Now we have the sign in, and then we do foo@bar.com. Do login. We get our one-time password. We say we just put it in 1 2 3 4 5 6, and then we enter the MFA, assuming that everything works fine. We're good to go. Then we can just sign out, and then when we do sign out, then it changes our state to sign in. So we know that everything should work as expected as far as the flow of things and the user state. So let's go ahead and enable all of these functions so we can do a live test run. Okay, so let's go ahead and begin. So let's just get to the sign up page. And so we're going to put in the email address that I have verified. Okay. And keep in mind this value that I put in here will be used for both the username and the password, but that shouldn't be a problem since we do have that extra custom auth that checks for the OTP and confirms that it's set up correctly. So let me go ahead and sign up. As you can see here, we were able to get the response. The user went to Cognito and was signed up correctly. However, they are not currently verified or confirmed. However, it did send a code to this destination. So let me go ahead and put in that username again at gmail.com. And in a different window, I'm opening up my email. And I got the code, which I can now put in here. And then I can confirm. And then as you can see, I'm successfully signed up. So now let's go ahead and test the OTP login. We can go ahead and put in my email, log in. Okay, so we're gonna error here. It says unexpected key to address. Oh, that should actually be 2 addresses. And let's take a look at that API documentation really quickly. Send email API reference, and let's see, destination object. Oh, yep, see, 2 addresses with an ES at the end. All right, so let's make that change to our function. Believe here we are. Yep, that's the problem here. So 2 addresses. Then let's save that, and we do need to go ahead and amplify push this so that it can take effect in the backend. So we'll give that a second to propagate. All right, so now that we have that deployed, let's go ahead and test this one more time. We should now receive an OTP that we can use and sign in to our account. All right, so let's go ahead and put in the email that we created our user with, and then we'll hit, I think I messed up there. Let me redo that again. So gmail.com, and then log in, and that should do a couple of things here. So this is the Cognito user that is sent back by Cognito. And you can see here that the challenge name is custom challenge. So now if I go into my email in a different window, I should have received an email that says here is your login code. Awesome, I did, and it did come from Amazon SCS. Let me actually show you this in this screen. So this is what the email looks like. So I'll just go ahead and mark it as looks safe. And then as you can see, it did go through Amazon SCS, and it did provide me with my login code, the 6-digit random code based on the date. And as you can see, this login, here's your OTP, and your login code is based off the template that I set up. Here's your OTP, your login code is code. So if we go ahead and enter that login code into here, it should work just fine. User send custom challenge answer. One other mistake that I made here. I did not set the Cognito user. So here in login, we do need to go ahead and set Cognito user to the response that we get back. So set Cognito user to res, then save that, and then now we do need to go and log in again, sign in instead. So I'll put in my email here, log in, and we see that the Cognito user is returned. If you go back to my email, we should see that usually opens it up as a, oh, I guess not in this case. We should see that the new code came in. We take that code, we come back to the app, we submit it, and we are successfully logged in. And now it produces the Cognito user and any resources that your app needs authentication to access will now be successful. One quick thing that we can do to check the current user is we can do this test by adding one more method, and that's the current authenticated user method. So here I'll go ahead and do this, and then we'll say we'll use the auth current authenticated user, and then we'll just log the response. So we'll say current user, and let me just make that change. And then here in our welcome view, we can say that we can add a button on click current user, I believe. I think it was just current. Yeah. So current, and then we'll just call that button current for now. And if we come here and we click current, we'll see that it does return a user. And then if we sign out, we'll see that if we call this same button, um, and this is on the sign in section, so if we come in to sign in and just add that current method there, and then we try to do that, we'll see that the user is not authenticated. So we have successfully set this up to use OTP. Again, this is for situations where you do not want the user to have to remember a password every time. But yeah, so this is basically how this works. Thanks for watching, and I'll include a copy of this in my Git repo if you can reference it if you want to duplicate it. However, keep in mind that the resources in the cloud do need to be set up with an account of your own.